Agus Lasca Hirlock, and welcome again to Minister Finian McGrath and his officials. And this is a good day in terms of giving much needed support and respite to people and families, and it has great benefit as well for the person who is being cared for, because the person who is being cared for, it weighs heavily on them as well, the burden that is on their loved one. And I think that's also to be acknowledged today. I want to go back to the very useful document from the Bill Digest on this bill, and just they produced by Dermot O'Sullivan and written by, and the policy background. The Carers in Crisis primetime special in December, work by Rosita Boland in the Irish Times, and the issues that were highlighted: insufficient respite care, insufficient home care, dealing with challenging behaviour, and that's one to let our minds rest on for a while. Detrimental impact of caring on carers' mental and physical health, concerns about what will happen to the carer, or what will happen to those cared for when the carer passes away. We are making an important step today, but I think it's important to contextualise it in what still needs to be done. The Programme for Partnership Government said that carers are the backbone of care provision in this country. In 2012, the first ever care strategy was published. We are committed to implementing it in full. We wish to see greater involvement of family carers in the preparation of care plans, aiding the provision of care, together with more accessible training and respite care to facilitate full support. We also support an increase in the carers allowance and carers benefit, as well as improving access to counselling supports and carers. And I just want to draw a relationship between that statement in early in 2016, and the fact that it would seem that a prime time programme delving into the crisis was what spurred this very welcome move. Maybe that's not the case, but that's the way it looks like in terms of... we've also seen issues that have come into the public domain where families have put their personal situation out there in public, and where there has been a response. And I simply want to say that if there isn't correlation between one thing and another here, the government really needs to come out and show that that's the case, because for a lot of people there is still that lagging sense that things will get responded to in some way when people are out there in the media, and that's something that is not helpful. Family Carers Ireland, we all know them as the Carers Association before that, and we've all benefited from their, not just their advocacy work, but the very practical work they do in every parish and townsland in this country, and keeping people and their situations together. One of the key issues they have while welcoming this is that, and while they recognise this as a positive step, they're very frustrated that the decision to limit the card to only carers in receipt of carers allowance imposes a means test by virtue of the fact that carers allowance is means tested. As such, this decision is at odds with the government commitment to introduce universal free GP access to all ages. And this means that while children under 6 and those aged under 70 are entitled to and are granted a GP visit card regardless of their means, carers are treated differently, and this point has already been made by Senator Ronan Mullen and others. The people who are on the Carers Support Grant, and I want to focus for a minute or two on those people while I'm coming to a conclusion. These are often what might be described as the squeezed middle. They don't meet the means test. Dermot O'Sullivan's work, we've seen that a lot of carers, the majority are women, and most of them are between 40 and 60. They're very significant years, particularly for women, but for adults in general. They're looking over their shoulder in terms of children and family development and all the rest of it, and looking at ageing parents or whatever. So I think that's something that needs to be taken account of. There's also the issue of the life years, the amount of years that some people spend caring. For some, it's a 2, 3, 5-year stretch. For others, it can start in their 20s or 30s. And I know you're live to this issue, and it's coming back to the idea of families being squares. A lot of these people being cared for need their houses adapted in some way or other. Now, we're not dealing with that today, but getting access to the housing adaptation grant, it's a highly means-tested grant. And if you have any means, reasonable means, not great means, it's another thing you can't really get your hands on too easily. So there are issues that relate to the carer support grant, and often that is, often the issue there is that one of the adults in that house is already having to give up work and had to forgo significant income that helps that household. These are people of working age. So I just put to you, and thank you for your tolerance, Cathaoirleach, I just put to you that issue. There is a squeezed group of people here that don't meet the means test, but are really under pressure. Having said that, I'm very happy to see this and welcome it very strongly.
Thank you, Senator. Alice Mary Higgins, and your 4 minutes.
Thank you very much. I'm joining with others in welcoming the bill. I think it's an important recognition, a small and in some senses, but still significant recognition of the work of care in our society, and the fact that the care given in so many homes across Ireland is a contribution to the state and a contribution to our shared common good. I think, and indeed that there is a responsibility that the state bears to both acknowledge and recognise and support carers in their work. I think there are many elements that are very, very positive in respect of this bill, and I think that's why it's passing with such speed through the House. I think the fact that, I note that we'll come to it at a later stage amendment, that half-rate carers is now likely to be included is a positive step, and I think good. However, I'll share the concerns, and maybe just to underline further the concerns in respect of those who may be on the carers support grant. I've both a practical question and kind of more of a question of principles in respect of this. One, on a practical question, I note that when Minister Harris was kind of announcing the beginning of this process, I think it was last December, I was just looking back on the papers, that they talked about the cost of about 11 million that has been anticipated. And I'd just like to ask directly the Minister if, as I understand it, many people who were on the carers allowance, because it's means tested, were already qualifying for the medical card, which is what has perhaps allowed the half-rate carers to come into the mix. Might there not also be scope, even within this bill, not within it, but within this bill, to include those on the carers support grant? And I think if there is any space within that original envisaged kind of fiscal price, and I know that's the beginning of the process, I think I would really urge you to try to make that happen as this goes through the Dáil. Of course, we can't put forward a money amendment here ourselves. And I think it's really, really important for all the reasons that were mentioned, but also because there are issues here in the means testing, and it's captured around, there's issues around financial independence. When one person gives up their work and gives up what they're doing to care for another person, the fact that their partner may be continuing to work on that, yes, that is money for the household, but for the person who is taking those key years, maybe a decade out of their career, in terms of delivering care, they also need financial independence, not simply income, but financial independence. And that's a concern that I have in relation to the adequacy of the carer support grant. But I do think that this way is including that there is that level of independence. The personers are not asking their partner for the monies to visit a GP or to access prescription, that they're not asking for that monies. And I would also note that for many, as was mentioned, if caring comes at a period that they may be seeking to re-enter the workforce in their 40s or in their 50s in some cases, and having a capital base that may be there is maybe their basis for a restart, and we all know the efforts it takes to restart a period of time. In that relation, there's another concern which is very related. I am very concerned, Minister, and I realise this touches more into the area of social protection, but it overlaps and it's part of that recognition. Now, there are still many who are caring in Ireland who are not having contributions made on their fact by virtue of the way in which they started caring. There's a hole in our system whereby those who were not making social protection contributions previously to starting care can sometimes not have contributions made on their behalf, and that they face issues around re-entry at a later point on one level, and also in terms of pensions in the longer term. I wanted to touch very briefly on one other related issue, which it was an example, and I do join with others in saying.
Running into injury time.
Okay, I'm into my final time. I will touch on other things. Simply, I was with my colleague John Dolan. I had the opportunity to co-host a joint Oireachtas committee meeting of health, social protection and education. And it was an opportunity to bring together persons with a disability, where the medical card system was again brought up as a real concern and a fear for those seeking to access employment or education. And as in the year when you, Minister, and I applaud you for it, are ratifying the UN CPRD, the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability, we need to move towards emancipation as well as care. And I think that many carers want to see those they care for supported and emancipated, and I think that's where that join up. Let them applaud them for the work, let the work not be invisible, and let's consult with them about the routes to opportunities for both carers and those cared for. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Minister, to respond.
First of all, can I thank our colleagues for the detailed responses that relate to the issue and also their great support. Can I say that individually, Senator Keith Swanwick there raised a couple of very important issues in relation to the 104 weeks, those cohort of people who miss out here. And as you said yourself, the 68,000 people. Now, that's something that I would be prepared to look at, and it's something I'll discuss with Minister Harris as well. And again, I'm open to a lot of constructive suggestions that came from the channel here today as well. Of course, on the GP issue, it's a very important part of the whole debate as well, because if we're doing GP cards in situations like that, we have to ensure that the infrastructure is there, the GP is there. And just to let you know, as Minister, I've met the NAGGP on a number of occasions since taking over as Minister of State Disabilities, and they've been very supportive of me, and I take your point in inclusive negotiations. That's the direction we should be going, and that's something that I will push within government. But just to let you know that I have met them myself on 2 occasions. I've spoken at one of their conferences, and I also got massive support from them in relation to the issues that I want to drive in disability services. So I think it's important that you know that as well. I believe all stakeholders should be around the table, and that's my plan as well.
Thank you, Minister.
In relation to Ronan Mullen's point there, he was very important about the importance of carers and the whole issue of respecting them and appreciating them in broader society. Does it go far enough? Can we extend it? I have a vision for that this is a step-by-step approach in relation to these issues. I see this as a small recognition of the amount of work people have done carers, but I also see it as part of 5 other things I did in the last 12 months, which, first of all, the restoration of the carers grant to the 105,000 people, the medical cards for the 11,000 children who were on the domiciliary care allowance, the 10 million for the respite care, and the 14 million last Monday for the housing adaptation grants. So I see that as part of the overall national disability strategy, and also being supportive of that issue. In relation to Senator Colm Burke's points, I welcome the support, and also Colm is a very important part in relation to the nursing home issue. I mean, when you look at the cost of that situation of €1,000, I think it can even go higher, as you know, probably yourself, Senator Burke. But the whole issue is we need to be radical, and we need to be creative, and we need to see where we're spending the money. And if we're not spending the money sensibly, I think it's important. Also, Colm suggested that we look at the social welfare system and revisit that whole area as well. Senator Maura Devine, very strong support for the carers, and of course I take your point on your amendment. In an ideal world, I would love to broaden out the legislation as well, but that's something that's a viewpoint that I do listen to. But I also take a point about the universal healthcare system. We have to go down that road, and particularly if we're going that direction, we have to implement the Chanticleer and stick to the plan. We have a plan here, and it's a very important part of the plan. I mentioned the 4 or 5 things that I've done in my portfolio on disabilities and carers. These are all part of the that broader plan as well. But we have a timetable, we have a broader vision, and Sláinte cares that direction. Senator John Dolan, I want to thank him for his support on many issues, but also he sees this as an important step. I disagree with him slightly on the issue of the role of the media, and I hope I don't get into trouble now like our Taoiseach the other day. But the important time is not to the perception, and I take your point on the perception. But can I say, the people that influence me as Minister, in here today I've heard loads of ideas from yourselves. Carers influence me. The disability groups influence me. When I go to DFI, I go to Inclusion Ireland. They influence me, and I bring those things into the pot and into government as well. And that's the direction. I listen to the carers and I try to implement what they're concerned about. But also, John has a very valid point in relation to people in those kind of middle-income areas. And I know on the housing adaptation grant, I think the limit is €60,000. And there are people who feel at times they miss out on support, and particularly in the whole carers sector. And we have to face that reality. Senator James Riley talked about the carers and about the acknowledged achievement. And again, he's like a lot of yourselves. He's seen the role there for the expansion of the scheme. He also mentioned the importance of the GPs, and also that we have to make sure that the carers are looked after. Senator Alice Mary Higgins, a lot of key things here in relation to you acknowledge the recognition of carers, which we all do, but we have to back up that, and I totally agree with you, link it into the United Nations Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities. If we're talking about looking after carers, you also mentioned the half-rate carers issue, the carers support grant, and include carers in this scheme as well. These are issues that I have an open mind in, and I also do take the point about there are people who feel left out of the system. So if we're talking about inclusion, we have to look at that system. And also you mentioned the medical card system as well. And I was delighted to hear you using the word emancipation, because as far as I'm concerned, we have a long way to go. And I know this from working with the National Disability Authority. The broader society, we have to bring those with us as well in relation to their attitude to people with disabilities and in relation to their attitude for carers. We need to ensure that these people are respected and their rights are respected as citizens of this state and as people who want to make a contribution. And again, you mentioned the medical card, and I was just thinking the fantastic people I met recently with disabilities that are in employment and they don't get the medical card because their salary is high. And what the cost of them, because they have a disability, it's way higher than the average cost of the average person. And that's something that I have looked at, and that's something that I've been talking to Minister Hyman Sarris over the last couple of weeks, and that's something I've presented. We kicked off there recently on the figures for the estimates for budget 2019. Met the HSE the other day and the Department of Health officials. We had our first meeting. They're the kind of issues. The other issue is about, which is often forgotten about, is the amount of urgent need for, when we're talking about carers, is the amount of people with disabilities who want to have their own independence and have their own personal assistance. And this is something I discussed before with yourselves and with Senator John Dolan and people like that. We need to ensure that we increase the personal assistance hours for people with disabilities so they can be more independent and they're not dependent and they want to get on with their lives like the rest of us. And let's look that direction as well. So what I'm saying is, let's be radical, let's be creative. I want to thank my colleagues for some of the fantastic ideas that I pick up here in relation to the disability issue. And also, I just want to acknowledge your support over the last 2 years in relation to the whole vision of the rights of all persons with a disability, the rights of our people as citizens, but also then to ensure that we invest in the services and we make sure that these rights are protected by implementing quality services. Thank you.
Last guy here, look, just a couple of comments. It's great to have this piece of work done today. I think it is important, while still acknowledging the caring role that we are, and the Minister has said this, that we have to have a trajectory that brings us from care out into independence, and that it becomes more supporting people from the home and out into the local community and employment. And I thank you very much for making those remarks about the importance of independent living. Your point, Minister, and I'm saying this not so much to you because you did reference the National Disability Authority, and they're very strong on this, and I know it from our own work in the Disability Federation. The general public, and I'm saying this more to my colleagues in the chamber, the general public very strongly get the notion of care, respite, and they are important things. It is a greater challenge, and I say this without any blame or anything, it's a greater challenge for the general public to understand how we can assist people to live life independently, to make their own little or big choices, to go on their own journey, to be able to go places independently and to have a sense of themselves as an agent. And Senator Higgins did mention the piece of work that was done between the three committees, Education, Health and Employment Affairs and Social Protection this year. And that's just one little example of trying to pull together where the gaps fall between very particular responsibilities. I know the Minister is very aware of this in his all-of-government brief, if you like, to try and bring disability inclusion. And that is, we're going to see that challenge in the forthcoming budget. Will there be practical measures, and the Minister understands this, I'm not, if you like, saying it to the Minister as such, will there be practical measures in health, in social protection? You've seen some of the issues raised today in relation to employment, in relation to housing, public transport being accessible, etc., etc. Will there be measures that go across a range of departments that actually stop the impediments for people, and will we see some improvement in just the level of basic income or support for people? So there are my remarks. It's a good day. I wish the Minister well, and I hope we in this House will be of assistance with the different committees and groups that we're on to push that, what is now a priority for our government, along with the other issues it has at a national level, to, using the term that was used by Senator Higgins, the road to emancipation for people with disabilities. Gormagus Cahirlock.
Senator Alice Mary Higgins.
Thank you very much. Just to speak very briefly, I very much welcome the passing of the bill, and I wanted to commend the Minister on one of the points he made there, and indeed in his initial speech, when he spoke first of respite care in his original speech, and also of that question of personal assistance. And I think it's very important for carers, I think, to recognise that the person who may be being cared for, their independence, even though they may be cared for within the home, that there is that duty of care carried by the state as well, and that they are contributing to it. And I think it's very, very important that family care, vital and important as it is never seen as an excuse for the state to fall back on its duty to provide those supports. And I do really, really, really welcome the commitment to look to strengthen the supports for personal assistance hours, and indeed, I would say, to look to issues such as choice in personal assistance hours, so that families and individuals are able to really have a role around making sure that that they are happy with and have accountability around home care services, which can sometimes feel like something people can feel very vulnerable about. And my final very practical small point, like many others, I would love if this wasn't simply the GP card, but proper, a full medical card, full health care. But I might ask you, Minister, in your conversations with Minister Harris, to have mind too, if we're not going to have the full medical card at this point, only the GP card, maybe a study of there are particular areas where carers, we know, for example, in relation to counselling services, we know that there is a huge mental strain and difficulty that, you know, in the work of caring at many times there's huge pressure. We know that there are certain other areas which are really very physically taxing in terms of care. So maybe to have a think about particular areas, particular medicals, and talk to the caring organisations around maybe if there might not be, if not a full medical card, some additional supplementary supports around specific areas where people go to the GP and they send them on, that some level of support follows them, and we can at least pattern it within some of the high volume areas of concern for carers. Thank you.
Minister, would you like to?
Yeah, just a couple of short points, because
yes.
I know that a lot of the points have been made. I want to thank all the senators again for their valuable contributions on this bill today. I also want to say, in relation to Senator Alice Mary Higgins there, the issue of the personal assistance hours is a very issue close to my heart, but also you're talking about those other supplementary supports as well. I think we should look at that and kind of go in further and see what the story is. Also, in relation to Senator John Dolan's comments, there has to be a right across every single department response to the issue of people with disabilities. I can tell you that I tell this to my colleague regularly, and I also will be doing that over the next couple of weeks. But also we need to do that in relation to the budgetary matters as well. Can I say that the important thing is that I very much welcome that we are able to bring this legislation through all stages in the Shannon today, so that we can move to have this important service available for our carers as quickly as possible, and which is going to be hopefully the 1st of September. As a long-time supporter and campaigner for people with disabilities, I am acutely aware of the pressure on the carers of people with disabilities, who are often under tremendous strain to keep going. So this is a good day for those people. And removing this barrier and the introduction of the free GP care to the additional 14,000 carers will prove to be a significant benefit, ensuring that health services can be accessed to prevent deterioration of the health of carers themselves. It will also aid carers in getting the necessary supports and services required for the benefit of both the carer and their family member or loved one. And finally, I would like to conclude once again, I want to thank all the senators who contributed to this debate, who are very supportive of the issue of the rights of people with disabilities. I am personally very pleased to bring this legislation forward. It is our obligation, as the representative in Ireland, to look after those who need it most. And on that note, I commend the bill and thank you very much for your support.
Thank you, Minister.